Good day, people. Welcome to another episode of my Python tutorial series. My name is Eliaza, and you are watching EA Lego Academy. So, in our last tutorial video, I did a video on algorithms working with user inputs, the list data structure, and the dictionary data structure. So, that video did not have an explanation because it was assumed, or rather, I want to assume that you guys have been following my tutorial series. So it won't make much sense if you did not follow my previous video. So if you're having anything or if you have any problem with that last video, just let me know in the comment section and I would clarify a few things to you. So now today we are going to be looking at modules. We're going to be looking at modules. So let's dive straight down to today's business. So what are modules? So modules are Python files that have code in them. The code in these Python files can be executed inside another Python file. So now this code can comprise of functions, they can comprise of algorithms, they can comprise of multiple lines of code, they can even comprise of classes. So after this tutorial or after this video, this episode, I will be doing another whereby I explain object-oriented programming. Because when we look at classes, then we are now addressing and treating object-oriented programming. So like I said, when I started this my tutorial series, I said that Python is a multi-paradigm programming language. So I will just repeat it again for clarity to reinforce and to emphasize the point. So when we say multi-paradigm, it simply means that that programming language can both be object-oriented and it can be procedural. So when we say object-oriented, it means that it must satisfy three basic properties, whereby if we say a programming language is object-oriented, it must satisfy polymorphism, encapsulation, and inheritance. And when we say a programming language is procedural, it allows us to use functions to execute a program in some series of steps. So procedures, as the name implies, but you need functions in order to execute your code. So without us talking too much, when we get there, when we get to that episode, I will explain more on object-oriented programming. But for now, we're looking at modules. So modules are Python files that have code in them. That's from a layman's point of view. Now we have another. Now it's there are Python files that have code in them. So let's look at the import statement or the import keyword. So this keyword is used to gain access to a Python file inside another Python file. So we said that modules are Python files that have code in them, and in order for you to access the code in these Python files, you would need to use a statement or a keyword in Python known as the import. So you would need to use this keyword in order to access the code in a Python file while you are inside another Python file. So this would get clearer and as we go along, and it will be second nature over time. So now the first thing you are going to do is to create a Python file called file1.py. So PyCharm assumes that the files you create in it, once you specify that it's a Python file, there would be no need for you to write an extension. And of course, extension tells us the format of a file. I don't have to go over this again. I talked about it when I started this tutorial series. Okay. So PyCharm puts the .py for you. So we're going to create a Python file called file1 and another Python file called file2. Now this file1 would have code in it. So for my video, my previous video, that is the video I did before my previous video, when I talked about user-defined functions, and I remember I said that if you guys have a problem with me copying and pasting code, you should let me know. I said if you prefer that I type my code as I'm explaining, let me know in the comment section. But if you are okay with me explaining the code and just copying it and pasting it, also let me know. So now what we're working with here is that we're all trying to work with time, and I assume that everybody has what they are doing. So I appreciate the fact that you guys time, take a little time from your time to watch my video. So it's very much appreciated. And the subscription and the likes, I really want to thank you guys, because of course you guys are the ones I'm doing all these for. So I don't want to waste you guys time. So what I will be doing, I will be copying my code and pasting it, but I will be explaining each line of code, because I think that will save us more time, and everybody would would learn from the content, and at the same time you will not waste too much time watching my videos. You'll get what you need, and you'll be able to go about your goals, your daily goals and objectives. All right, so without much talk and without further ado, let's start. So you want to go to your PyCharm and you want to create a file. So I'll just increase the screen so that we can see what we're doing. So so now the first thing you want to do is to create a file called file one. Come here, right click. I'm sure we already know how to create Python files already. So you come here, click on Python file, and then you type the name file one and you press enter. So now before I copy and paste the code, I will explain again. So we have already treated functions two tutorial videos away back, sorry, two tutorial videos back. We treated functions, user defined functions. To be specific, we have been using inbuilt functions already when we looked at functions in the list class, in the dictionary class, when we looked at the print function in the string class, if you can still remember, when we did upper, lower, and title. So now we looked at how we could create our own functions 2 videos back, and we know what these are. So these are 2 parameters in the parentheses of this function, and this function is making a sentence with both of those parameters. Now, this is another function that has 3 parameters, but the third parameter is acting or is an arbitrary keyword argument. And of course, we said that a parameter that has a double asterisk, of course, we know that it's an arbitrary keyword argument, but also at the same time, it is also a dictionary. So we can, when we are giving it arguments during the function call, we are going to give it we're going to assign it values that go in pairs, such that you create a variable and you assign that variable a value. Now that variable and value would be the value or argument of this parameter. So I talked about that, I explained it. So what you're going to do, now I'm also adding key value pairs in the body. So I said the fact that a parameter that has an asterisk, or the fact that you are going to assign an argument or an arbitrary keyword argument to a parameter with a double asterisk at the front, it means that that parameter is a dictionary. So I can add key value pairs the normal conventional way I do when you are trying to add key value pairs to a dictionary. So that is why I did it this way. But mind you, to recap and to recall, if you can remember, I told you that even though I'm adding key value pairs like this, it doesn't mean that this would be the first 2 key value pairs that would be printed out when you try to execute this program to display the values that this dictionary has. It would be the key value pairs that you assigned as arguments to this parameter during the function call that will be the first key value pairs. Why? Because I said when you have parameters in the parentheses of a function, the proper way to give argument to that parameter is during the function call. So since it is still acting as a parameter, or rather since it is officially still a parameter, but at the same time a dictionary, but first and foremost it is a parameter, we know that parameters all need arguments during the function call. So having said that, we know that the argument we pass to this parameter would be the first key value pairs, not these 2 key value pairs here. I hope that makes a lot of sense. So I'm just revising, like I said, I'm just recapping what I already explained in two tutorial videos back. So just copy this. And again, let's not forget we're returning back the dictionary. So that's what we're expected to see. So if you can remember, when I talked about the return statement, I said that your function, the return statement makes your function to be like a variable, as if it's a variable, not necessarily a variable, but you can use it the same way you use a variable that has been assigned a value. So the value that the function is returning would now be the value assigned to that variable, which is explore. Looking at it in that context, but specifically, it's not a variable. You understand? It just does the same thing. So, but of course, we know that the return statement allows us to execute a program within a function without printing it out or without revealing it. So just copy this and paste it in your file one. All right, so now the next thing we're going to do is to create file two, because now to further explain what we use the import statement to do. Now we use the import statement when we are trying to access code from a Python file while we are inside another Python file. But the main purpose of the import statement, of course, we know that it's used to call functions. So it could also be used to, access a variable that has been assigned a value in a Python file while we are trying to use that variable in another Python file. So it doesn't only work for calling a function, it also works for using values stored in the variable. You are just accessing code from one Python file while you are inside another Python file. So now the next thing we're going to do is to come here and create another file and call it file 2. So right click, come here, Python file, file 2. So now the next thing we're going to do. So now the first thing I'm doing, the next thing I'm doing here is I'm importing file 1. So this allows me to access all the code in file 1 from the name, from what the import statement does. We said it allows us to access code in one Python file while we are inside another Python file. So now, since this run function is inside my file 1, as you can see here, is inside my file 1, I want to call this function inside my file 2. So to gain access to that file, you want to import file 1. So after I have imported file 1 in my file 2, I will call the name of my file, then .run. So we use the dot notation when we are trying to access code inside a file. It's also used when we are trying to, okay, we'll get there. But for now, we use it when we are trying to access code in a file, especially when we are importing that file or accessing the code in that file inside another file. So now this is going to allow me to access this run function inside so let's assume that this is my file 2 and this is my file 1 here at the top. So this dot run means that I'm trying to access the code inside file 1, which is run and explore. So for me to access run, I will say dot run. I will now pass positional arguments for the two parameters in run's parentheses. So Adam would be the value assigned to name, and 34 would be the value assigned to age. So just a recap, if you hear me use value, just know that I'm referring to arguments when I'm talking about a function. And if you hear me use variable, just know I'm talking about parameters when I'm referring to a function. So like I said in my two videos back, I I talked about the fact that parameters are variables and arguments are values, but it depends on where we use them. So since I'm using a variable in a function, specifically in its parentheses, we refer to that variable as a parameter, not a variable, but we know it's a variable. And this would be the values of those variables, but because we are still referring to the function, we call them arguments. So Adam is an argument of this parameter name, and 34 is the argument of this parameter age. So you will discover that if I should execute this code, it will print out, hello there, Adam, you are 34. Now the next one, because this function is returning a value, like I said, when we have the return statement in a function, it treats that function as a variable and the value that is being returned as the value of that variable. So you can't just write a variable name, it won't print out the value that the variable is holding. You would have to use the print function in order to see that value that that variable is holding. So that is why I had to use print before I now had to call my function so that it can print out what the function is returning, which is this dictionary. So you will discover that when this gets printed out, we're going to have a key called course and the value of that key, physics, as the first key value pair. Like I said, this is the proper way. Like this will be the first argument that would be printed out, even though we know that this is it's a dictionary already. But first and foremost, like I said, it's a parameter. So because it's also a dictionary, you can give it key value pairs like this. But the proper way, that is the first value within that dictionary that Python would recognize, would be the argument of that parameter, which is this. So you can pass as many key value pairs as possible. I just decided to make it one so that I can shorten the length of this video and the code. So this will be the first key value pair, followed by name, then Adam, and then age, and then 34. So you can see that here I'm using the two arguments as values of the second and third key that would be displayed after I execute this code. So what you are going to do, just copy it from here down, and then you paste it in your file 2. You come here and then you paste your code. Now, like I said, we are calling these two functions from this file 2 here. We're trying to call these two functions from my file 2. So you just come here, click on play, and you will discover that it makes the sentence calling the first function, and then it prints out the dictionary also calling the second function. All right, so now what I did here, just when you are done, you can comment it out so that we won't waste time. So what I did here was that I showed you the various ways you can import code from a file, that is different ways of carrying out the same thing. We are trying to do the same thing here, but we are doing it in different ways. So the first thing you should understand as a programmer is that there are 1001 way to write the same code. So as you get older and you have more experience, you will discover them. So even I myself too, I'm learning. We're all learning, and we're all trying to get better. So now this second way allows me to create an alias for this my file 1. So now an alias is a name used in place of an original name. So the original name is my file 1. I'm creating a name that I want to use in place of file 1. So, but of course, it's not like it replaces file 1 permanently. It just replaces file 1 at this point in time as I'm trying to execute the code from file 1. So you will discover that I came here and I did the exact same thing I did here. So I'm now using F1 in place of file 1. So it will print out the exact same code that we got. So I said F1.explore also, and we would get the same result. So just copy your code and paste it here, Ctrl V. So now you can come here and execute your code. So you see that we get the exact same result. So when you are done, you want to comment that out also as well. Now the next thing that we would be looking at. So now we were also doing the exact same thing too, but in another way. Now, what did I do here? I said from file 1. Now, I've not talked about the from, I've only talked about the import statement or keyword. So now just a quick recap again. Statements are the same thing are the same things as functions. So statements are functions and they are also keywords. But to be very specific, when we say keywords, they are already existing in that programming language. So they give you the ability to write code. That's what I call them. They give you the ability to write code, keywords. And statements also give you the ability to also write code too, but they are functions without a parenthesis. So keyword statements, I can use them interchangeably. They all mean the same thing. All right. So now this from keyword allows me to be able to specify where I'm trying to access code from. So it's just like English language. I'm saying from this file, I'm trying to access, run, and explore. So from file one, import, run, comma, explore. So now since I've already specified what I'm trying to access from this file one, there would be no need for me to now come here again and say file one dot run, although it will still work, but it's more like then what was now the need for you to do this if you are still going to come here and say file one dot explore. Understand? It doesn't make sense. So if you come here and say file one dot explore, that will nullify the whole purpose for you doing this. So us saying from file one import, run, and explore allows us to bypass using file one in order to access, run, and explore. So because I've already specified that I'm trying to access, run, and explore, there will be no need for me to say file one.run or file one.explore. I can instead just come down here and write the names of those functions and they would get executed. So this is the third method, the third way of importing code from a file into another file. So just come here, paste, run, and you will discover that you get the same result. All right. So comment out your code after executing. So now the next thing we want to look at is so now this is another method of us importing from a file. So this time around, I'm giving an alias to the function I'm trying to access from file one. So it's still the same convention that I used here from file one import run, but this time around, I'm giving run an alias. So from file one import run as R. So now mind you, you can also do the same thing for explore. You can say from file one import explore as something. You can give it an alias. But now since I did not access explore, or since I did not import file one again, if I decide to come here and also attempt to call explore, I will get an error. I will get an error. So I will need to specify another import again, like maybe import file one, before I can be able to access my explore. So we will do that there when we copy the code. So now this time around, I'm only just executing my run function. So you will discover that instead of writing run in full, I decided to use the alias, and this would still execute the code that my run function is holding. This will still execute this code. So just come here, paste your code, and it will print out the code that that run function is holding. Yeah. So just comment it out when you are done. You have gotten the result. All right. So the next thing is from file one import asterisk. So this is a common term across programming languages. Every single programming language uses this convention. So what this asterisk simply means is every single code inside this file. So I'm saying from this file, I'm trying to access everything. That's just what this line of code is saying. From file one, I'm trying to access everything. So asterisk means everything in file one. So since I'm doing that, I can also decide to write explore and it will still execute what is inside my explore function. You can come here and I can decide to also write explore and then pass arguments, maybe Alex and then 33 and then a key value pair. So I can just come here and say school Oxford. Now you will discover that it will print out your dictionary. Oh, okay, sorry. Like I told you, since my explore function is returning a value, you have to use it with the print sentence. If you can remember, so just write print before it, and then you discover that it will print out. So don't forget, school and Oxford would be first. So I already explained the reason why that happened. All right, so that's practically how you can access code from one file inside another file. So now before we proceed, we have some inbuilt modules, some inbuilt files in Python, in the Python language. So there are so many modules that I cannot list here in my tutorial video. So this is an introductory course to the Python programming language. It's not expected for you to master every single thing in Python. It's just to give you the proper foundation for you to develop better as a Python programmer. So I'll be talking about another module called the random module. So from the name, you can already have an intuition as to what it means. So it's a module that allows us to be able to access random numbers or to display random numbers. So the fact that the numbers are random doesn't necessarily mean that the algorithm producing those random numbers is random. The algorithm was carefully crafted and developed in order for it to display those random numbers. So the algorithm is not random, although what it was expected to do is random. So now, since we already know how to access a file from one file into another file, so we will just proceed from there. So I will just come here and say import, and I will say random. The random is an inbuilt module. So now the first thing we want to look at is the random function inside the random module. So although random is a module, a Python file inbuilt inside the Python interpreter, it has a function inside itself called random, having the same name as that Python file. So you can just come here. So now what this function does before we start, it allows us to generate random numbers between the range of 0 and 1. Random decimal numbers to be specific. So it will generate random decimal numbers between 0 and 1. So I will just come here and say print random dot random. So you will discover that this would generate random decimal numbers between 0 and 1. So each time you execute your code, you will discover that the value will be changing, but the value does not go below 0 and it does not go above 1. So it just alternates within that range. All right, so the next one we have, you comment this one out when you're done. The next one we have is the rand int. So rand int. So as the name implies, it allows us to generate random whole numbers from whichever range you want to specify. So it is just similar to your range function, whereby you can specify the range of values you want to display or you want to work with. So here I can just come here and say print random dot rand int. So I want to generate random numbers between 10 and 25. So you will discover that this would print out random numbers between the range of 10 and 25, never below 10 and never above 25. So you just click on play. So each time you run your code, you will discover that you get a different value each time that lies within that range. It never goes below and it never goes above. All right. So when you are done with that, comment it out. Comment it out. So this video will be very precise. I won't waste your time. And the next one we are talking about is uniform. So uniform. So now this allows us to generate random decimal numbers within a specified range. So unlike the random function that does not allow you to specify the range of values, uniform allows you to specify the range of decimal values. So you just come here and say random dot uniform and specify your values, maybe 26.3 and 77.18. It doesn't really matter. You can even make them whole numbers, but it will generate decimal numbers for you within that range. So each time you press play, you discover that you have random numbers within that range. Random numbers within that range. All right, so before we close from today's episode, I would want to specify something and explain something. So in from our last from 2 videos back, that is our um the last video we did before the last video, I talked about user defined functions, and there was a very important aspect I didn't talk about. So I did not talk about anonymous functions. So I didn't talk about them. So I want to use this opportunity to talk about what they are, because when we progress and when we get to the GUI part, when we talk about creating desktop applications and linking it to a database, a PostgreSQL database, you would discover why we need this function called an anonymous function. So we said these are functions that are not created using the def keyword, and they are written on a straight line, and we use the keyword lambda to denote them. So from the name, that's what they imply. We don't use the def keyword to create them, but we use the lambda keyword to denote them. So they have parameters like normal functions, and they have code, but they are written on a straight line. We don't have lambda functions that are written on multiple lines. It's just one line that they are written on. So below is an example of an anonymous function, both written on its own and embedded inside a normal function. So now this is my anonymous function here called first. Of course, you can see that it looks like a variable, but it's a function. And what makes it a function is this lambda that I have here. So now you can see that here this function has two parameters, name and age, and I'm using them to make a sentence. Now you will discover that initially when I created this function that looks like a variable, it didn't have a parenthesis. But when I'm trying to execute its code or the code within it, I would need to apply a parenthesis. Now that parenthesis is so that I can give arguments to those parameters I created for my function. And of course, because there's no print sentence within this anonymous function, I would need to use the print function in order to display what this my anonymous function is holding or is trying to execute. So you will discover that if I should copy this code, it will print out, hello there Alex, you are 34. So just copy it. So, and before I copy and paste, just know that anonymous functions can also have parameters that have keyword arguments. Just the same thing you can do with user-defined functions that use the def keyword is the same thing you can also do with anonymous functions as well. All right, just copy your code and paste. Paste it and execute, and you will discover that you would have that sentence printed out. All right, so now we want to look at how we can embed an anonymous function within a user defined function. So you can see that here I created a user defined function called embed, and it has a parameter, and within this user defined function I have an anonymous function called contain. Now this anonymous function has two parameters like the previous one, and it's making a sentence with those two parameters and as well as the parameter for the user defined function. So it's using both its parameters and the parameters of the user defined function to make a sentence. And you will discover that I'm returning back the anonymous function as the value for my function. So now you notice that I did something here outside of the function. Just before the function call, I created a new variable and I assigned my user defined function as the value of that variable. Now the moment I did that, that variable now becomes my anonymous function. So you notice that when I assigned my user defined function as the value of that variable, I gave it an argument, a positional argument. So I gave course a positional argument, and at the same time, that variable that I assigned my user defined function as its value now automatically became my anonymous function. So I now give the two parameters in my anonymous function positional arguments. So I give them positional arguments, David and 37. So David has now been assigned to name, and 37 has now been assigned to age. So you just copy your code and you will discover that it will print out greetings to you, David, you are 37, you offer physics. So you just add and here and you offer physics. Okay, so of course you can see that I'm using print. Why? Because I'm returning back something from my user defined function. And also the anonymous function too as well is, of course, it's like we would need to use the print function before you can see what the anonymous function is trying to execute. But the reason why we're using print here is not because of this anonymous function, it's because of my user defined function, because it's actually returning a value. So I will show you the reason why, and I will show you something to prove this point. So just copy this first, and I will show you the other way you can write this code without having to use print here. So copy your code and paste. So just comment this one out and then paste the new one. So you discover that it prints out greetings to you, David, you are 37 and you offer physics. So now what is the other way that we can do this without having to say print? So now just comment this out, or rather copy it first, then comment out this one. Copy it, then comment it out. Then come here and paste it. So now I'm going to make a few minor tweaks to this code. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to make this my function print out contain, not return. So it's going to print out contain, and since it is printing out contain, contain is now my anonymous function. So from here, I will supply arguments to these two parameters, name and age. I will just say David. So let me use the same values so that you can see that we get the same result. So 37. And then now, instead of me creating a new variable and assigning it a value, just comment this one out. And instead of just come here and call your function to complete this print and write your function name instead. So course, and you write the name of the course. Just write physics instead, physics, and you will discover that it will print out the same thing. Okay, sorry, embed the physics. You say embed, which is the name of my function. So now just run your code and you will discover that you have the same thing. Greetings to you, David, you are 37 and you offer physics. So this is the other way you can execute your code. All right, so that brings us to the end of this tutorial video. So if you, now before I start my usual, we can see that the video was relatively short. I assume, I haven't checked the time, but I'm assuming that I did not waste your time. So if you feel like my video has been informative to you, and if you're enjoying what I'm doing, if you really like what I'm doing and you want to support me, please like and subscribe to my channel. And if you feel like this video would be very informative to your friends, families, or people you love, your loved ones, please share this video. So till next time, we will meet again. Have a very great day.